Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you all here for our Lunch and Learn, the ethics of allyship with Moji, who is was actually one of the speakers who came to our annual conference, and she spoke about the ethics of allyship, but briefly, and so many of you said you wanted to hear more from her, that we're excited to have her back to do a more comprehensive overview of this really important topic. If you don't know Moji, she is currently the system level ethicist at Fraser Health Authority in British Columbia. And in her current role, she promotes and advances ethical decision-making in the organization while applying a diversity lens to developing and reviewing policies, guidelines, and strategies. And she also serves as the diversity officer on the board of directors at the Canadian Bioethics Society. So we are really grateful to have her here. Before we begin, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So what I'd like to invite you to do is to join with me in the chat, and you can put the name of where you are. If you don't know it, please go to placenames.mapdev.ca. You can see it at the bottom, or you can just Google. But please join with me in this land acknowledgement, and also just take a moment. If you don't have a window that you can look outside, perhaps call to mind, close your eyes, and think of a favorite spot here in unceded Mi'kma'ki or wherever you're joining us. Just take a few moments to call to mind a place that you feel most connected to the land, and just take a moment for that gratitude. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982. They remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. And we acknowledge that settler Canadians continue to benefit from the ongoing occupation of Indigenous lands to the detriment of Indigenous peoples. And the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating our acknowledgement into action. We seek to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education. We commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning. So let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And when we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. We are all treaty people. So how does this impact what we do and how we do it? And how will it guide our work together today? Decolonizing means recognizing intersectional bias and injustice within a white supremacist queerphobic world. We honor the memories, contributions, and legacies of those communities of African descent who were uprooted from their land and brought to Turtle Island against their will. We commit to using our professional development to both learn and unlearn so that we can ensure safer social work practice and a more just world for all people. We are grateful for the new code of ethics that is getting ready to become public for us all to learn from, and that will require us to shift from the illusion of neutrality to becoming actively anti-racist and fighting against racism and all intersectional prejudice that is part of colonization. And today's ethical training will meet your ethics requirement. So please be sure to reflect on that. And just a reminder, it is time for renewals. You should have gotten a newsletter yesterday with a link to a blog to tell you how to renew. And when you enter your professional development, you will be asked this question: how does your educational session, your professional development, inform your practice and ensure safer social work practice, especially for the most vulnerable and marginalized amongst us? So these are the questions to reflect upon as we begin our Lunch and Learn. And so with that, I am going to invite Moji to share her screen, and so grateful to have her back with us and to have all of us able to learn. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nyash, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here today, and thanks for inviting me to this education session where we'll be speaking on the ethics of allyship. I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, thank you very much. So while I'm doing that, I was going to say that my goal today is to connect ethical theories and considerations that can inform allyship with diversity work, and to discuss practical steps to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. Literature shows that leaders and employees from dominant social groups are increasingly being called upon to champion for marginalized group members to remove and to improve equity and inclusion. In the broader societal context, however, motivation to allies tend to wax and wane with prominent events. Therefore, it is critical to understand how allies' motivation can be powerfully sustained over time so that real systemic change can be integrated into the fabric of our institutions and organizations. From an ethical perspective, there has been studies on how to move on with sets of virtues that are fueled by moral motivation, and this might support and sustain allyship, and that's where we're going into today. So here are my discussion points that we look into the different approaches of medical ethics, that how virtual ethics, which is one of the approaches of medical ethics, informs allyship, how allyship is connected to diversity work, and what does that really look like in practice within healthcare, within our profession, and with historically marginalized groups or individuals. And then we look at some practical steps to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. I will use the illustration of the ethics tree to introduce the different approaches to ethics. The intermingling of religion, science, culture, and philosophy through many centuries formed the roots of medical ethics, which is the traditions and values and rules that support the moral life. So at the point of development that permits philosophical rather than methodological reflection, these four sources feed into an ethical theory. From the roots came the trunk. The theories derived from efforts to explain and justify decisions about the moral lives are those that are shown here in the trunk. The three traditional theories that comprise the trunk are teleology, virtue theory, and the deontology theory. The trunk, in turn, supports the three major branches of medical ethics, which deals with the moral problems brought about by medicine in the modern world. These three major branches of medical ethics are, as you can see, public health ethics, which addresses issues of broad societal concern; applied ethics, which discusses and applies to ethics to the plethora of medical things, conundrum faced by practitioners; and clinical ethics, which brings all this into focus at the bedside of the patient. So this stream, with its roots, its trunk, and branches, not only demonstrate the relationship between the various theories that also vividly show, but it also vividly shows the rapid growth of theories, as you can see, that has recently developed in many small branches filling the top of the trees. What we are called to do is consider ethics in our practice, which is that we want to continually make ethically justified decisions. We want to explain and justify our decisions, not only in clinical terms, but in moral terms as well. The question then is, why be moral? The three major theories in the tree trunk of ethics and those in bioethics help us answer that question. The first theory, teleology, is also known as utilitarianism. And another name, you should have heard this before, for it is consequentialism. Those are all big, big names, but I'm sure they're familiar to us when we talk about ethics. So they all belong to this first class of theory about ethics, and it analyzes the issue in terms of consequences that produce a net of benefits over harm. So under this theory, the consequentialists will weigh the harm of society against the harm of the patient and will come to the side of the society, even if it harmed the patient. And this is where the philosophy of public health had come from. The second theory, deontology, analyzes issues in terms of duties and rights, obligations. The centerpiece of deontological theory is the notion of personhood. Ideally, a person acted morally for no reason at all, but rather because it is required to act this way just as a person. I just want to be moral. I want to do what I'm supposed to do. And the focus on the person is what led the developer of this theory, Immanuel Kant, to propose that it is absolutely and always wrong to treat persons merely as means and not at the same time as an end in themselves. If a person is treated as an end in himself, there is a requirement to respect the person's values. Nothing can be imposed on others against their will or without their consent. Indeed, deontology will urge that all persons have an obligation to help others accomplish their goals as part of this respect. And this is where the principle of autonomy emerged from. The third theory, the virtue theory, states that rather than the ideas of teleology and deontology, the virtues are grounded in both human psychology and human affairs. That is, the real relations of people to one another in friendship and in community. Thus, virtues are habits formed by one's personality, parental and societal training, and professional or even other standards suitable for one's life choice and role in the society. So virtue ethics that is derived from the virtue theory aligns with the long life process of allyship. It guides behavior to appropriate ends. The focus is on the moral agent's character and contextual designment rather than on formula. Simply, virtual ethics is looking at whatever we do, our actions, it's really action-oriented and responsible for the situations of those particular in our community, those particular actions and how it affects us as a community. So virtual ethics comes from the premise that it is not the intention of one's action that matters, but the impact. How does it impact? It argues that the systems are in some ways designed to oppress, and they are sustained intentionally by some, unintentionally by others. And the impact of unawareness among people who are privileged can be deeply harmful to marginalized groups or individuals. For well-developed strong intentions to be useful, they have to be converted into effective interpersonal actions, which would be the impact. And that is what virtual ethics is coming from, which really aligns with our principle and our understanding of what allyship should be. So what is it? To get us have a shared understanding of the discussion today, I will use this description of allyship, having laid that ground of the ethical theories. Allyship has been described as a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups of people. Allyship is not self-defined, as the work and effort must be recognized by those one is seeking to ally with. When we talk of trust, trust should be mutual. To be an ally and to have allies. Consistency speaks about an ally who actively, respectfully, and sustainably engage in the struggles of discriminated group to which they do not belong. And accountability rests on the fact that this is an opportunity to grow, to learn from ourselves, to learn from oneself while building confidence in others. Allyship goes on, as described by Ellis, as fighting injustice and promoting equity through acts of advocacy. It's often emphasizing underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities and applies to any disadvantaged group involving gender identity, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and others. Now, I want to explore how privilege and allyship are related to health inequity. That is, disparities that are systemic, they are avoidable, and they are unfair. There are norms, patterns, and structures in society that work for or against certain groups of people which are unrelated to their individual merits or behavior. Put in another way, there are systemic forces that play that privilege some social group over others, such as sexism, racism, ableism, just to mention a few. So these unfair social structures have profound effects on health, producing inequities in morbidity and mortality. So in healthcare, how is inequity addressed? You will notice that, or if you have noticed, efforts to address inequities tend to frame concerns as unfair consequences of the social structures that result in poor results without considerations of the ways in which these same social structures give unheard advantages to others. So marginalized position is commonly framed as the entire story of health equity as opposed to just one part of it. If the problem was viewed not only as being in marginalized, but also the system itself, then a different set of solutions should follow, such as change of policy and laws to create and safeguard against things like discrimination, which are products of the system due to inequality. So when the problem is faced as challenges faced by members of a vulnerable group, then potential solutions will focus exclusively on interventions to address their issues. And their issues are typically framed as caused by the behaviors of individuals as opposed to being linked to unearned disadvantages resulting from the system of inequality. So the goal of allyship is not to improve or is not to move people from marginalized position to a position of privilege, because both positions are really, really unfair. Rather, the goal is to dismantle the system causing these inequities. Framing the entire story to involve both sides, that is, underserved and the social structure that caused the divide. An Indigenous physician and public health leader, Marcia Anderson, succinctly captures this point as follows, and I'm going to read. From now on, instead of vulnerable people, I'm going to use the phrase people we oppress through policy choices and discourses of racial inferiority. It's a bit long, but I think will help us focus on where the problem actually lies. What does allyship look like within our professions, within different professions for that matter? Allyship shows up as a useful voice in addressing the thorny and rapidly evolving space of social justice. And here's what I mean. When an ally perceives the injustice in a marginalized individual within the profession or within our organization, they come up with the plan and the plan to question the fairness or unfairness of the company's process or evaluation process, even before the leaders. It also shows up as moral perception, that is expanding one's sensitivity to virtue-related stimuli involving art groups who disproportionately suffer the indignities of injustice. It also shows up under this moral perception. It blends and integrates virtues to optimally target the good for marginalized group, dominant groups, and the organization. And this is seen, or this can be demonstrated when explaining to a co-worker that their inadvertent behavior, for example, microaggression toward a marginalized colleague was offensive. So ideally, the ally is serving as a corrective measure that prevents future microaggression against the marginalized people while respecting the humanity of the offender and contributing to inclusive organizational structure as a whole. So that's the way it can show up within our society. What does it look like historically with historically marginalized groups and individuals? Practicing allyship requires a reorientation from the dominant way of thinking about how people in positions of privileges should address inequities, which assumes that the most ethical and effective way to address health disparity is for privileged to use their expertise to help marginalized groups with their problems. This flawed approach strengthens the system of inequality by reinforcing the assumption that privileged are experts, unconnected to the system of inequality, and that marginalized people need rescuing. If the goal is to dismantle the system of inequality that results in health disparities, a reorientation is required, whereby privileged reorient their motivation from, I wish to help the less fortunate, or I wish my expertise to reduce inequities for marginalized population, to the following commitments. I seek to understand my own role in upholding systems of oppression that create health inequities. I learn from the expertise of and work in solidarity with historically marginalized groups to help me understand and take action on systems of inequality. Next, I'll introduce some principles as an entry point for guiding such actions, that is, for practicing critical allyship. And these principles are the ethic model of virtue based in allyship. Ethics model of virtue-based allyship has 4 stages of development. And I want to really point to the fact that it is a development. It is not something that is static. It is not something that is attained just as once. So the first stage is energize. So from the synonym of ethic, E-T-H-I-C, it is taken, the acronym is taken from the letters of each of the stages. So the E stands for energize, and this is experienced as supporting psychological investment, which involves acknowledging differences and identifying social justice problems, and it is fueled by the virtues of compassion and fairness. An ally fuses compassion with fairness when explaining to a dominant co-worker that their behavior towards a marginalized colleague was offensive. Stage 2, which is the think through. This is experienced as supporting intellectual understanding. It entails seeking knowledge about group differences and learning strategies for allyship that are likely to be effective. Intellectual humility, perspective taking, and really rests on wisdom. Stage 3, initiative. This is supporting and regulating allyship action. It moves beyond allyship or intra-personal processes into actions in the interpersonal and organizational sphere. This stage is fueled by the virtues of prudence, moral courage, and honesty with oneself and others. So there could be some overlap with stage 2 and stage 3 because we have wisdom in stage 2, and then we prudence, and then we can argue what is the difference between wisdom. I think it's in their application. Stage 4 speaks to commitment. This is supporting long-term dedication. It entails establishing long-term engagement and draws upon the virtue of perseverance and patience. At the start of this session, I mentioned that social allyship wax and wane. Burnout, feeling overwhelmed, and becoming discouraged can set in when organizations or cultures are slow to change. And this is where perseverance and patience will enable allies to stay the course in the long run and remain committed to allyship. Having spoken about the ethic model, I now want to connect ethics, allyship, and EDI. Let's have some reflection on the following. Diversity. So diversity it's really speaking into the reality that we are all different from one another. And we do need to be able to respond to this in our real world. What will be our attitude to this diversity? Sorry, I'm trying to advance my slide. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay. Okay, sorry about that.
You're good.
My fault, sorry.
We needed a few minutes to digest the incredibly important things that you are sharing. So
oh, thank you
it's
so
all
much.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. So equity refers to fairness and justice, whereas equality means providing the same to all. Equity means recognizing that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to imbalances. Health equity involves the fair distribution of resources needed for health, fair distribution, and this is where my fairness comes in. Fair distribution of resources needed for health, fair access to the opportunities available. And my third fairness is fairness in the support offered to people when ill. To live up to equity, we need to define what we really mean by it, know how to measure it, identify the root causes, and address root causes of inequity. Health equity means that all people can reach their full health potential and should not be disadvantaged from attaining it because of their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, age, social class, socioeconomic status, or other socially determined circumstances. Inclusion is our commitment that everyone belongs, that everyone's needs counts, that no one's voice should be excluded from community discussions and decisions, that will attend to the needs of people who have been discriminated against and have been marginalized. And I really like the direction in which we are going in including patients' perspectives in our system's decisions. I think that's a good direction in which we're going. We just need to be able to pay attention that when we're including them, their perspectives is really valued. And their perspectives and what they're bringing to the table is what really helps us as part and enriches our discussion when we move on to creating things like policies or guidelines, or even come up with some big organizational decisions. Having said that, the problem is that some people don't receive equal care because there's really a problem. We know there's diversity, we want to include people, but the problem is that some people don't receive equal care, they don't receive equal respect or treatment with respect or equal access to needed services for reasons that are well justified. And that is where discrimination exists, if we must call it out. Discrimination takes many forms. It could be race-based, religion-based, ability-based, age-based, and we can go on. Allyship is essential in countering the effects of these experiences, particularly when these groups might otherwise pass by without attention as a result of their minority status. The impact is even worse of discrimination, of exclusion, non-inclusion, however we want to put it, for people who have more than one of these characteristics. So for example, and we call it intersectionality. A trans First Nations person experiencing homelessness and mental health issues is likely to experience much greater discrimination than a person without mental health issues with secure housing who is trans and white or cis and First Nations. So you can see the impact is really different. The impact it makes some people is different, even though it affects people who have more characteristics more than those that are just discriminated against because of one of those characteristics, which should not matter. Here's what we want to aim at embracing, realizing that we're all diverse, recognizing that we want to maintain equity, recognizing that we want to be inclusive. We want to be able to embrace pluralism in our society. And how do we do this? Here are a few points suggested in which we can use when we recognize it to embrace it. That we believe that diversity is good, that we treat people with respect, and meaning individuals and communities living and working together seek common value-based solutions to common problems without compromising their deepest values. Understanding each other's values and beliefs will enhance our understanding of the issues. Achieving such solutions will actually allow us to live with greater integrity. So if we have subgroups, we want subgroups to be able to maintain their own identity in a very meaningful way, with their deep-held beliefs and virtues and practices within the laws of our bigger society. We shouldn't want to change each other because, like I did mention initially, the both end of the spectrum is not really where we want people to remain. It's really unfair ends. So we shouldn't want to change each other. We should try to build common foundations on which to move forward. And here are a few suggestions on the practical steps to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. When we understand drivers of disparity and co-develop strategies to mitigate them. And here are some strategies that have been suggested when we develop cultural humility. Cultural humility is the foremost consideration in even understanding the experiences of individuals, be they our patients and their families, or even our colleagues. And that promotes our cultural understanding. Combat stereotypes. We advocate for inclusive policies that protect the rights and well-being of individuals, and we promote workforce reflective of our society. So I'm gradually coming to the end of this presentation. So building a culture that ethically supports allyship. Allyship is an active, consistent practice of unlearning and reevaluating in which a person is in a position of privilege and power seeks to operate in solidarity with marginalized groups. An initial step in building a culture that ethically supports allyship is to recognize and resist our everyday ways that people unintentionally strengthen as opposed to dismantling inequity. A key step in this practice is to reject the dangerous and misguided urge to save people driven by the irrational sense of expertise, entitlement, and access. Intentionally cultivating dominant group members as allies could sustainably sustain and strengthen organizations' equity and inclusion efforts. So the frequency of interaction and the time co-workers spend together offer so much unparalleled opportunities for relational approaches to inclusion. So we have just so much strength that we can lean on, that we can bring into building this strength and having very strong allies in issues that happen either within profession, within the organization, and in our society as a whole. And this includes working to build among others in position of privileges and working and mobilizing them collectively under leadership of marginalized people. So we operate in solidarity. We build capacity for change, leveraging their privilege to inspire other privileged group members to allyship action. And I did speak about the ethic model of allyship: E, energize, think through, initiative, and commitment. Before I end, I just want to add that the discussion about allyship sometimes can lead to the faulty assumption of innocence and counterproductive attention to guilt. The virtue-based approach is based on an analysis that rejects both of these unhelpful patterns, and we should just keep them off so that you'll be able to have a strong build and a strong breakdown of what's from the system that causes this divide. I'd like to finally read this quote. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us walk together. These words were used by Lila Watson, Aboriginal elder and activist, to set out a challenge for people working towards social justice. Since then, these words that have inspired and guided many people pursuing social justice still stands till today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We are so grateful. And yes, we probably have some place for questions. Hope that you take some of the love and some of the applause that's coming and the comments in the chat. We are so grateful. You brought up a lot, and please add questions in the chat or Q&A if you would like. But one of the questions is, so here's one. In stage 3, often a white social worker woman might be using less prudence in their ally work, but are actually engaging in fear of action, fear of being criticized for doing the wrong thing. What is your perspective?
Great question. Great not because the social worker experiencing fear is going through a good thing, but great because it's a reality. And I appreciate that's been brought forward. One of the things about the ethic model is that you start from stage 1. Like I did say, it's a developmental thing. You start from stage 1. So in stage 1, when you have been able to have some energy. You start from being energized. When have been able to have some energy and you have really developed yourself in experiencing or in how to psychologically provide support, because these things, I will tell you, you cannot separate them from our emotions, which is part of the things that you have described. What am I feeling? I'm feeling fear. So it's like you're having some psychological investments. You're building yourself from stage one. You are beginning to acknowledge the differences. You are beginning to identify some of those problems, and you are infusing into, even in your work, the compassion. You are infusing in your work even the fairness, which people can't see. So before you even get to stage 3, which you are now, which it looks like you are now being criticized or might even want to be crucified for being an ally, which can be very, very unfortunate, because in reality, these things do happen. One will be able to stand on the fact that the impact, don't you see the impact? Don't you see the evidence of the action? Don't you see how advocating for the patients as an ally has helped to reduce that disparity and moved the patient from being on caseload number 48 to caseload number 5 within 1 week? So I really appreciate the fact that a social worker can find themselves in that position, which is a very hard position. Moving from energizing to thinking through, supporting the intellectual understanding of all of these things means that you're seeking, even among your group, how you can have other people that can partner with you, because being the sole person can be frustrating and it will not help that perseverance that you want to get to in number 4. So I hope that is helpful. Sometimes you might even just be the sole person standing for what you believe and standing for the values and the virtues that you want to advance. I get that totally. However, as we stand in that soul stage, solitude, we can begin to look, where else can we tap resources? Where else can we tap opportunities? Where else can we tap some energy to be able to draw into this? So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so very much. It absolutely was. There was another question. Do you have any thoughts on an ethical way to speak truth to power when those people are a part of the social work power structure?
Again, great question, difficult question. Difficult question. Difficult because as we go through these experiences and as we go through improving ourselves professionally and even as a person, we learn things. And as we learn things, we begin to see even sometimes the things that we did not see before. And when they begin to come to us, we are like, oh yeah, those are things that happened at such a time, or those are things that are happening now, or those are things which, oh, I wished, or I thought, or I wished I knew how to. Yeah. So, and that's why I said it's really a great question. So if you're not there yet, you will, and you want to be an ally, you want to be a great, you're going to get there. So thanks for that. Thanks for that question. So how do we speak the ethical truth? That's the language that has been used when those that we even want to speak the truth to are in a position of power. I think that is what I understand. So there is this hierarchy. And breaking down that hierarchy can be very difficult and sometimes not an impossible task to do. I would say that it's always helpful to look into what structures exist and what structures can help us. So you have the social work leadership, you need to speak the truth to them, but they are also part of that hierarchical power as a society or as a member of a professional group or even in your small unit. there could be ways of participating in decision making. They might not put you as the first line of the decision maker, but there could be opportunities to be able to lend a voice in making decisions. I don't know what opportunities could be out there. It could be coming to meetings like this and they're listening to us as we're having this kind of conversation. And I tell you, sometimes they are oblivious of the fact that they need to do those things. And that is why we said, as part of building this, the leadership needs to be involved even in causes of even things like implicit biases, causes like going through course of cultural understanding, so that they are aware that even the members that they are leading have some things which they have been blinded to, and those courses and learnings can help them to really find themselves. I know I'm not hitting that answer right on the head and say, you can do A, you can do B, you can do C, but I would say from an ethical perspective, what we want happens is that we provide an opportunity for dialogue. We provide an opportunity for understanding the values that should shape whatever decision or direction our profession is going. So you have your code of ethics. There could be an opportunity to say, in our code of ethics, here are the things that we should be doing. Let's just examine, are they aligned with what exactly we are doing for this kind of situations? Being confrontational has not been, sometimes they have worked, but they have not been really very helpful. In my practice of doing ethics, being confrontational has not been helpful, but asking for an audience, asking for an opportunity for a roundtable discussion or conversation in my practice had been helpful. And it could be an organizational ethical consult, a professional ethical consult, a professional way of getting ourselves around the table and say, you know what, here are things, even though we are not in position of leadership, but if leaders could provide an opportunity for X, Y, and Z, and then the leaders will know that, you know what, the people that we are leading are learning to, are itching to have their ears.
Thank you so much. So 3 questions have kind of popped up in our last couple of minutes. One had to do with the role of patient family advisory committees. You referenced it a little bit in your presentation, but
Yes.
that is not something that is quite as prevalent here on the East Coast. So that could be something for people to think about how to build, and as Moji suggested, as we expand to have more voices and think instead of confrontation direct, how do we do that? There was also a comment about how a lot of this is connected to the Ubuntu idea of how we are all related and how this seems to have a lot of parallels. And then there was one last question or comment about how do we deal with the role of guilt in all of this. So those are some of the final things, and I think we're going to have to ask you to come back at some point because you've been so amazing and transformational.
Thank you.
Reflections about that or something else?
Thank you so much. I know we are really running out of time, but it's important to, if we have like 30 seconds, to really talk about dealing with the role of guilt. During, I think, when you're having that feeling, it's an emotion, but it is not one that you want to carry for long. You don't want to carry because it's going to impact the way you work. It's going to impact the way you relate with others. So having recognized that it is there is a good thing. Now we have to address it. And the way to address it, one of the ways to address it is to say, you know what, I am who I am. Right? I did not have a say in in how I look and where I was born, how I was born. But I have a responsibility now that I have been formed to determine how I want to move forward. And that is how to deal with it. So you are not responsible for being who you are. I'm not responsible for having black hair or having gray eyes or anything, or being a Black woman. I'm not responsible for that, but I'm responsible for the way I relate in the society. And I'm responsible for the way I react. I'm responsible for the way I respond. So when you look at those R's, relate, you react, you respond, then it begins to help you to begin to shift. And if you need help with some of the courses and some of the learnings, I think they can be very good.
Well, I think that on that very, very important note, we hope to have an opportunity to continue to learn from you. And we are so deeply, deeply indebted to you for the wisdom that you have shared. I kind of want this YouTube video to be like mandatory for our ethics committee because it was so beautiful and so helpful. And gratitude to everyone for joining us. And we hope that on the West Coast where you are, it is a beautiful, sunny, warm day for you. And gratitude to everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.